I am giving my mother the opportunity to live in the small apartment I rented. The voice of my son, Jason, resonated throughout the banquet hall as he raised his glass in front of the 40 guests at my 68th birthday party. The applause began, shy at first, as if people did not quite know whether they should celebrate or not. I smiled politely, with that smile I had perfected over decades of social gatherings, and replied with the calmest voice I could find. "Thank you, sweetheart, but I have my 3-story beach house." The silence fell like a slab of concrete. Jason took a step forward, sweating, his eyes shining in a strange, almost manic way, and released the words that would change everything. "My wife, her daughters, and her mother are already moving in there." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. I felt every gaze in that hall pinning itself to my face. I saw Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, trying to hide behind the dessert table. I saw Brenda, her mother, pale as a ghost next to the chocolate fountain. And in that exact moment, I walked toward the head table, took the microphone the DJ had left on the amplifier, and said aloud so that every single person in that place could hear it. "Then I think it is time for everyone to know the truth about what is happening in my house. Which country are you watching me from right now? Write it in the comments, because I need to know there are people who understand what it means to defend what is yours." But so you can understand how I arrived at that moment, standing with a microphone trembling in my hands and my heart beating like a war drum. I need to take you back 3 years exactly before that 68th birthday, which became the worst and best day of my life at the same time. I need you to know how a widowed, quiet woman, who only wanted to enjoy her retirement in peace, ended up discovering a family conspiracy that cost me sleep for months, and almost cost me everything I built in nearly 7 decades of existence. It was a Sunday in October when Jason arrived at my house with that nervous boy face I had known since he was 5 years old. I was on the 2nd floor deck, watering my jasmine plants that perfumed the whole block when they bloomed. The ocean breeze moved the white linen curtains, and I thought, as I thought every afternoon at that hour, that every sacrifice to buy this property had been worth it. 40 years working as a certified public accountant at 3 different firms, saving every dollar I could, investing intelligently, and finally, 5 years ago, buying this 3-story house facing the ocean with the money from the sale of my previous condo and the savings of a lifetime. It was mine, completely mine, paid in full, with the deed in my name, no debts, no mortgage. My sanctuary after 40 years of marriage to a good man who left me a widow at 66. Jason sat in one of the white wicker chairs I had bought at an antique market and looked at me with those dark eyes he inherited from his father. "Mom, I met someone special." My son was 42 years old, had never been married, always so buried in his work at that logistics company where he had spent 20 years climbing the ladder. Of course, my mother's heart jumped with joy. Of course, I wanted to see him happy, with a partner, building a life with someone. He told me about Tiffany, 38 years old, divorced, mother of 2 teenagers, Kayla, 16, and Madison, 14. He told me he met her at a French cooking course, that she taught him pastry techniques, that they laughed together, that he felt something he had never felt before. It all sounded beautiful, normal, even exciting. But there was something about the way Jason would not hold my gaze when I asked specific questions. Something about how he touched the back of his neck. That nervous gesture he had since childhood when he was hiding some mischief from me. I asked him about her family, and that is where I saw the first crack in his enthusiasm. "Her mother lives with them," he told me, almost in a whisper. "But it is temporary, just until Tiffany finishes settling some things from the divorce." I nodded, smiled, filled his glass with more homemade lemonade, and did not say what I was thinking. But something inside me, that inner voice that women develop after decades of experience, of disappointments, of learning to read between the lines, shouted a warning that I chose to ignore because I wanted to see my son happy. I met her 15 days later. Jason organized a lunch at an expensive waterfront restaurant, one of those with ivory tablecloths and genuine silver cutlery. Tiffany arrived 20 minutes late, entering like a whirlwind of apologies and perfume that was too sweet. She was attractive, I cannot deny it. Black hair down to her waist, magazine-ready makeup, an emerald green dress that fit her body like a second skin. She hugged me, as if we were friends for life, squeezing me against her chest in a way that seemed calculated, almost theatrical. "Mrs. Margaret, Jason talks so much about you that I feel like we are already family." That word, family, came out of her mouth with a familiarity that made my skin crawl, but I attributed it to the air conditioning in the restaurant being too strong. During the 2 hours that lunch lasted, Tiffany did not stop talking. Her devastating divorce, her abusive ex-husband who left her completely bankrupt, how she was rebuilding her life from zero to give her daughters a future. Every sentence was a drama worthy of a primetime soap opera. Every story came accompanied by deep sighs and wet eyes that never actually shed real tears. I asked the polite questions expected of a future mother-in-law, nodded at the appropriate moments. But inside, I was observing how she touched Jason's arm every 30 seconds, how she leaned toward the Scotch glass every time she laughed, how her eyes lit up in an almost predatory way when my son casually mentioned that I had some properties. She used that exact word, properties, in plural, as if I were a real estate tycoon and not simply a woman who worked her whole life to have a decent roof over her head. 2 months after that lunch came the first visit to my house, and with it, the real beginning of the nightmare I did not yet know I was living. Tiffany insisted on seeing the home where Jason grew up, even though my son knew perfectly well that I bought this house just 5 years ago, long after he had moved out. But there she was, one Saturday afternoon, ringing the doorbell insistently while I finished baking a lemon cake. I opened the door expecting to find her alone with Jason, but behind her came her 2 daughters, Kayla and Madison, 2 thin and pale girls who greeted me with an almost inaudible murmur before hiding behind their mother like scared puppies. Tiffany entered my house like a hurricane of rehearsed exclamations. "Good Lord, Mrs. Margaret, this is a palace. 3 full floors. Look at this ocean view, and this garden with flowers. Jason, hadn't you told me your mother lived like a queen?" She walked through the living room, touching every piece of furniture, caressing the white linen curtains, stopping in front of every window to admire the view as if she were appraising the property. Her daughters followed her in silence, also touching everything, also looking at everything with those big, dark eyes that seemed to be memorizing every detail. I offered lemonade, served the cake I had just baked, tried to be the gracious host I had always been. But there was something about the way Tiffany walked through my house that made me feel invaded, evaluated, almost hunted. And then she appeared. Brenda, Tiffany's mother. No one had warned me she would come. No one had asked me for permission to bring an extra person. She simply appeared 15 minutes after the rest, walking through my front door without ringing the bell, as if she had all the right in the world to be there. She was a woman of about 60 years, my approximate age, but completely different from me in every sense. Hair dyed a platinum blonde that screamed cheap salon, makeup so heavy you could see the lines where the foundation ended and her neck began, a fuchsia dress too tight for her body, and an attitude I can only describe as predatory. She looked me up and down like an appraiser, evaluating an object at an auction, and then, without even greeting me properly, said, "So this is the famous house? No, nice to meet you. No, thank you for having us." Just so this is the famous house, as if my home were a tourist spot she had heard about. Brenda poured herself lemonade without me offering it, sat on my favorite sofa without asking for permission, and began to ask questions that froze my blood. "How many square feet is this property, Mrs. Margaret? Are all 3 floors habitable? How many bedrooms in total? Is the garden also included in the deed?" I answered with monosyllables, increasingly uncomfortable, looking at Jason for some sign that he also found this inappropriate, but my son was too busy looking at Tiffany with love-struck eyes to notice that his future mother-in-law was basically doing a complete inventory of my assets. When Brenda asked if I lived completely alone in this house that was so big, something inside me knew, with that visceral certainty that does not need proof, that I was in danger. That night, after they left, I could not sleep. I stayed seated on the 3rd floor deck, looking at the black ocean under the moon, feeling an oppression in my chest I had not felt since my husband got sick. I tried to tell myself I was exaggerating, that it was normal for the bride's family to want to know the groom's family, that my fears were a product of the loneliness and distrust of a widow who had been alone too long. But I could not get out of my head the way Brenda had walked through my house, measuring distances with her eyes, the way Tiffany had opened every door just to see, the way the girls had whispered among themselves while checking the rooms on the second floor. The visits became more frequent after that. Every 2 weeks, sometimes every week, Tiffany found an excuse to come over. That she wanted to show me photos of possible dresses for the wedding they were already planning. That she needed my opinion on centerpieces. That Jason had left some important documents behind. She always came with Brenda. Always. And always, without fail, they ended up touring the house again, as if every visit were the first time, as if they needed to refresh their memory on the layout of the spaces. Brenda made comments that sounded innocent, but cut like knives. What a waste for a single person to live in so much space. With what it must cost to maintain this house, Mrs. Margaret, at your age, aren't you afraid of being so alone in such a big property? At your age. Those words stuck in my brain like hot iron. I was 68 years old. Yes, but I was perfectly healthy, perfectly capable, perfectly lucid. I walked 3 miles every morning along the beach. I drove my own car. I managed my own finances. I cooked, cleaned, gardened. I did not need help from anyone. But Brenda had started a subtle campaign of planting the idea that I was a vulnerable old woman who needed protection, care, supervision. And the worst thing is that I could see how those seeds were beginning to germinate in my own son's mind. Jason started calling me more often, but his calls were no longer the casual conversations from before. Now every call came loaded with worried questions. Are you eating well, Mom? Do you remember to take your medicine? I did not take any medicine. My health was perfect, but he insisted, as if I had told him otherwise. Don't you feel lonely in that big house? Have you thought about selling and moving to something smaller, more manageable? I told him no, that I was perfectly happy where I was, that this house was my dream come true. But I could hear Tiffany's voice in the background, whispering, suggesting, manipulating. 6 months after the initial lunch, Jason announced the official engagement. There was a small party at an event hall. Nothing very elaborate, just close family and some friends. I went in my best lavender dress and a smile that hurt to keep on my face. Brenda hugged me as if we were best friends and whispered in my ear, "Now we are family, Margaret. Real family." The way she said family made me feel as if I had just signed a contract I had not read. Throughout the party, I watched how Brenda and Tiffany moved among the guests, how they controlled every aspect of the event, how Jason obeyed every suggestion from Tiffany like a well-trained dog. My son, that independent and successful man, had become a puppet, and I was watching how they pulled his strings in real time. 2 weeks after the engagement party, Tiffany asked me for something I should have rejected immediately, but my stupid desire to be a nice mother-in-law betrayed me. She asked me for a copy of my house keys, just for emergencies. She said that since they would soon officially be family, and since Jason spent so much time at my house when he came to visit, it would be more convenient if they could enter, if they arrived, and I was at the grocery store, or on my morning walk. I should have said no. I should have refused flatly, invented any excuse, kept my boundaries clear and firm. But my son was there, looking at me with those pleading eyes, saying, "Mom, please, it is just for practicality." And I, like the sentimental idiot I was in that moment, accepted. I had a copy of the keys made and handed them to Tiffany one rainy afternoon in March, putting them in her hand while a voice inside my head screamed that I was making a terrible mistake. She took them with a smile that did not reach her eyes and said, "Thank you, mother-in-law. This gives us so much peace of mind, knowing we can take care of you, take care of me," as if I were an invalid who needed constant supervision. The unannounced visits began exactly 1 week later. I arrived home after my morning walk and found Brenda in my kitchen, making herself a coffee as if it were her own house. I almost had a heart attack from the fright. "Good Lord, Brenda, what are you doing here?" She turned around with insulting calm and said, "Oh, Margaret, I didn't mean to scare you." Tiffany gave me the keys, and since I was passing through the neighborhood, I thought I would have a little coffee while I waited for you. I hope you don't mind. I did mind. I minded terribly, but I swallowed my indignation and smiled because I was still trapped in that stupid desire to keep the family peace, to not be the conflictive mother-in-law from the horror stories everyone tells. After that day, the intrusions became routine. Brenda appeared 2-3 times a week, sometimes with Tiffany, sometimes alone, sometimes with the girls. They always had an excuse, that they wanted to see how I was, that they brought food they had cooked too much of, that they needed to use my bathroom because the one in their apartment was under repair. But I saw them. I saw them measuring spaces with their eyes, opening closets by mistake, asking about the age of my furniture, commenting on the value the property must have in the current market. One afternoon, I found them in my bedroom on the 3rd floor, my most private space, the sanctuary where I kept my husband's ashes and photographs of our entire life together. Brenda was opening the drawers of my dresser while Tiffany went through my closet. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out louder than I intended, loaded with all the contained rage of weeks. Tiffany jumped and dropped one of my silk blouses. "Oh, mother-in-law, sorry. We were just looking for the bathroom and got confused about the door." Lie. The 3rd floor bathroom was clearly marked and was on the other side of the hallway. My bedroom had a sign on the door that said private in large letters. There was no way to get confused, unless you were intentionally invading my privacy. Brenda did not even try to apologize. She simply closed the drawer she had opened and walked out of the room with a smile that gave me chills. That night, I called Jason. I told him, with all the calm I could gather, that I needed his fiancée and her family to respect my space, that the unannounced visits were making me uncomfortable, that I needed my keys back. My son got upset. He got upset with me. "Mom, they are trying to integrate into the family. They are trying to take care of you because they love you. Why do you have to be so suspicious? Tiffany says that lately you have been very forgetful, very confused. She says the other day you didn't even remember she had been here." I felt as if I had been slapped. I was not forgetful. I was not confused. My mind worked perfectly well, but Tiffany was planting doubts about my mental capacity in my own son's head, preparing the ground for something I could not yet see completely, but that terrified me. I did not get the keys back. Even worse, I started to doubt myself. What if she was right? What if I really was losing my memory and didn't realize it? I started writing everything down in a notebook. Every visit, every conversation, every detail. I needed proof that my mind was still functioning perfectly, and while I made those notes, I started noting patterns that chilled me to the bone. Brenda always asked about documents. Always. "Where do you keep the deeds to the house, Margaret? Do you have a will? Does Jason know where your important papers are in case something happens to you?" And Tiffany, always backing up her mother. "Yes, mother-in-law, it is important that someone trustworthy knows where everything is. At your age, one never knows. At my age, again those damn words. I was 68 years old, not 108. I was healthier than many 40-year-old women. But they had decided I was a senile old woman who needed her life managed, and they were convincing my son of the same thing. The day Jason suggested I give him power of attorney so he could help me with my finances, I almost exploded. I told him my finances were perfectly managed, that I had been a professional CPA for 40 years, that I probably knew more about numbers than he and his wife together. He got offended. He accused me of being proud, stubborn, irresponsible. He hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I cried all that night, not for the words, but because I was losing my son and didn't know how to stop it. The wedding was held in July, 5 months after that terrible call. It was a small ceremony in a garden with an ocean view. I went in my pearl-colored dress and a smile that took me 3 hours of practice in front of the mirror to perfect. I watched my son marry a woman who I knew, with every fiber of my being, did not really love him, who saw him as a means to an end. But he was happy, or at least he seemed to be. And I swallowed my objections because I had already learned that any negative comment about Tiffany would turn me into the enemy. Brenda gave a speech during the reception about the union of 2 families that sounded more like a declaration of conquest than a celebratory toast. She looked directly at me when she said, "And now, what belongs to one belongs to all." I felt a knot in my stomach that did not undo itself all night. After the wedding, things accelerated in a way I still struggle to process. Jason and Tiffany moved into an apartment near downtown, a nice 2-bedroom place my son rented with his salary. The girls and Brenda were supposed to stay in the apartment where they already lived, but Brenda started complaining constantly that the place was too small, too noisy, that the girls needed more space to study, and every time she complained, she looked at Jason with meaningful eyes, as if expecting him to offer a solution that we all knew what it was. My son, bless his naive heart, did not understand the manipulation happening right in front of his eyes. He thought his new mother-in-law was a woman worried about her granddaughters, not the calculating strategist I saw with crystal clarity. 2 months after the wedding, I received a call from my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a 70-year-old man who lived 3 houses down. "Margaret, I don't want to meddle where I'm not called, but I have seen your daughter-in-law and another older lady entering your house several times when your car isn't there. Is everything okay?" I told him yes, that I had given them keys, that they were family. But after hanging up, something inside me broke. Mr. Henderson had noticed a pattern. Every time I went out, especially when I went to my monthly medical appointments or to visit my cousin in the neighboring town, Tiffany and Brenda appeared. I decided to run a test. I told Jason I was going to visit my cousin Linda in the city for 3 days, that I needed a break, a change of scenery, but I didn't go anywhere. I stayed at a hotel 20 minutes from my house, a small and discreet place where no one knew me, and I asked Mr. Henderson to let me know if he saw any strange movement on my property. I didn't have to wait long. The first day, at 10 in the morning, Mr. Henderson sent me a text message. "A moving truck arrived at your house. Your daughter-in-law is directing 3 men who are unloading furniture." I felt as if all the blood had been drained from my body in a single blow. I took a taxi immediately, my hands shaking so much I could barely dial Mr. Henderson's number to confirm it wasn't a macabre joke. When I arrived at my house, the scene I found surpassed my worst nightmares. The front door was wide open, and a moving truck was blocking my driveway. 3 sweaty men were carrying boxes and furniture from the truck into the interior of my house. Tiffany was in the entrance with a clipboard, directing traffic like an orchestra conductor, pointing to which rooms they should take each object. Brenda was in my living room. She had already rearranged my furniture against the walls to make space for a horrible mustard-colored sofa I had never seen in my life. And the girls, Kayla and Madison, were going up the stairs with boxes marked with their names, laughing and talking about finally having big rooms. What the hell is going on here? My voice came out like a roar. I didn't even recognize myself. The movers stopped in their tracks. Tiffany turned around with an expression of surprise so fake even a child would have identified it as acting. "Mother-in-law, what are you doing here? You weren't going to be with your cousin until Friday." I walked toward her with steps so firm, my shoes resonated against the hardwood floor like gunshots. "Explain to me right now what is happening in my house." Brenda appeared from the living room with a condescending smile that made my blood boil. "Margaret, calm down. Don't get upset. It isn't good for your blood pressure. Jason gave us permission. He said it was best for everyone, that you agreed. Lie, rotten, and shameless lie. I had never, ever given permission for this." I took out my phone and called Jason immediately, my hands still shaking with fury and shock. He answered on the 3rd ring, with a sleepy voice. "Mom, did something happen? Did you give your wife and your mother-in-law permission to move into my house?" There was a long and heavy silence on the other end of the line. "Too long, Mom. We can talk about this when you are calmer. Tiffany explained to me that you had suggested they stay at the house while you were traveling, to take care of it, so you wouldn't be alone." Another lie. I had never suggested anything remotely similar. "Jason, come to this house right now, or I am calling the police." "The police? Mom, you are exaggerating. They are family." I hung up the phone before saying something I would regret forever. I turned to the movers and told them with the most authoritative voice I could gather, "This is my property. I am the owner. I did not authorize this move. You need to take everything you brought in out and return it to the truck right now." The men looked at each other, confused, looking at Tiffany as if waiting for instructions. She took a step forward with that sweet and poisonous smile that already gave me nausea. "Mrs. Margaret, I understand you are confused. Sometimes it happens at a certain age. That is why Jason thought it would be better for us to be here, to take care of you, to make sure you take your medicine, that you don't have accidents." She called me confused. She reduced me to a senile old woman in front of strangers. I do not take medicine. My mind is perfectly clear. And I am telling you to get your things out of my house right now, or I am calling the police for invasion of private property. Brenda let out a dry and cruel laugh. The police? Margaret, please. Your son gave us authorization. We have the keys you gave us yourself. There is no invasion here. This is a family arrangement that you approved and now don't remember. Exactly why you need someone to take care of you. I felt as if I were trapped in a nightmare from which I could not wake up. They had built a complete narrative in which I was a forgetful old woman who couldn't trust her own memory. And they were using my own keys, my own generosity, my own desire to be a good mother-in-law against me. But I was not a woman who gave up easily. I had survived 4 decades in a corporate world dominated by men. I had raised a son alone after my husband got sick. I had built a fortune from scratch. I was not going to let 2 manipulators take everything I had worked for. I called the police. Tiffany and Brenda laughed when I dialed the number, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum devoid of meaning. But when the patrol car arrived 15 minutes later, their faces changed. The officer who got out of the car was a man of about 40 with a serious and professional expression. I explained the situation. This was my house. I was the sole owner, according to the deeds. These people were trying to move in without my consent. Tiffany immediately put her victim act into motion. Instant tears, broken voice, trembling hands. Officer, my mother-in-law is confused. Her son, my husband, asked us to come take care of her because lately she has been very forgetful. We have keys because she gave them to us herself months ago. The officer looked at me evaluating, and I could see the question in his eyes. Was I a confused old lady or a homeowner defending her rights? I took out my ID, the house deeds that I always kept in a safe in my bedroom. My latest medical exams showing I was perfectly healthy mentally and physically. Officer, I am 68 years old, but my mind functions perfectly. These women are trying to take over my property, using my son as an intermediary. I never gave permission for this move. I want them out of my house immediately. Brenda tried to interrupt, but the officer raised his hand. Ma'am, if the homeowner says she did not authorize your presence here, you need to leave. You can resolve this family matter later, but right now you need to vacate the property. Tiffany took out her phone and called Jason on speaker, probably thinking my son would come to rescue them. Honey, the police are here and your mom is kicking us out of the house. Tell them you gave us permission. Jason arrived 30 minutes later, disheveled and confused, still in sleepwear under a wrinkled jacket. He tried to mediate, to explain to the officer that it was a family misunderstanding, that he had thought I agreed with the arrangement. But the officer was clear. Without written authorization from the owner, which was me, the move was illegal. The men from the truck, who by that moment were already tired of the drama, began to take out everything they had brought in. The scene that followed was something I will never forget as long as I live. Tiffany crying dramatically in the front yard, Brenda screaming insults at me that would make a sailor blush, the girls looking at me with pure hate while carrying their boxes back to the truck, and Jason standing in the middle of it all, with the face of someone who was finally starting to understand he had been manipulated, but still didn't want to admit it completely. The neighbors had come out to their porches and windows, watching the spectacle with that mix of horror and fascination that only a public family drama can provoke. Mr. Henderson was in his yard with his arms crossed, nodding with approval every time our gazes crossed, as if telling me, well done, well done. The moving truck finally left 2 hours later, taking every box, every piece of furniture, every trace of the invasion that had been on the verge of changing my life forever. When everyone left, when the police retreated and the neighbors returned to their houses, Jason remained standing in my living room like a scolded child. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally destroyed, but also furious in a way I had never experienced before. How could you? My voice came out broken, loaded with all the pain of a betrayed mother. How could you give them permission to move into my house without even asking me? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew since he was a teenager. Mom, I thought, Tiffany told me you had suggested the idea, that you were worried about being alone, that you wanted to have family close. She said you guys had discussed it during one of her visits. Lie after lie after lie. And my son had swallowed them all whole because he was blinded by what he thought was love. Jason, Look me in the eye and tell me honestly. At what moment would I, who spent the last 5 years building my independent life after your father's death, who rejected your offer to move in with you when I was widowed because I wanted my own space, have told you that I wanted your wife, your mother-in-law, and your stepdaughters to move into my house? I saw something break in his eyes, that first crack in the facade of denial he had been maintaining. She said you were forgetting things, that the other time you didn't remember her visits, that your doctor was worried. What doctor, Jason? My last checkup was 2 months ago, and the doctor said I have the health of a 50-year-old woman. Did she show you any medical report? Did she talk to any professional? Or did she simply tell you and you believed her without verifying? The silence that followed was so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest. Jason let himself fall onto my sofa, the same sofa Brenda had tried to corner against the wall to make room for her horrible mustard-colored furniture. God, Mom, what have I done? Those 4 words, pronounced with genuine horror and regret, broke my heart in a different way than the anger. I sat next to him and took his hand. That hand I had held when he learned to walk, when he fell off his bike, when we buried his father. You allowed them to manipulate you, son, and they almost cost me everything I have, he cried. My 42-year-old son cried like I hadn't seen him cry since he was a small child, and I hugged him, because despite everything, he was still my son, my only son, and a mother's love does not extinguish even when you are betrayed. But the hug didn't last long. His phone started ringing insistently. It was Tiffany, of course, he answered on speaker, probably too exhausted to hide the conversation from me. His wife's voice came out of the device like the screech of a wounded animal. Jason, where are you? Your mother humiliated us in front of the whole neighborhood. The police treated us like criminals. My mother is devastated. The girls are crying. Are you going to allow your wife and your in-laws to be treated like this? Jason opened his mouth to answer, but I took the phone from his hand. Tiffany, this is Margaret. You and your mother tried to steal my house. You were not treated like criminals. You were treated exactly like what you are, invaders. And if you set foot on my property again without my explicit and written permission, next time I won't just call the police. I will file formal charges. I hung up before she could respond. Jason was looking at me with a mix of shock and something that might have been admiration. Mom, she is my wife. You can't talk to her like that. Your wife tried to steal my house. Jason. I can and I will talk to her exactly however I please. I got up from the sofa, walked toward the door, and opened it meaningfully. I think you need to leave now. I need to be alone. I need to process all this. And I need you to think very seriously about who the woman you married is. He left without saying anything else, with his shoulders slumped and his head down, and I closed the door behind him, feeling a mix of victory and devastation so intense I could barely breathe. That night, alone in my recovered house, I changed all the locks. I called an emergency locksmith who arrived at 10 at night and replaced every lock, every deadbolt, every entry point. It cost me $400, but it was worth every penny. The old keys I had given Tiffany and Brenda were now useless except as a reminder of my own naivety. I also installed a security system with cameras at all entrances, something I should have done years ago. If anyone tried to enter my property again, I would have video evidence from every possible angle. I was not going to be taken by surprise again. The following days were an avalanche of text messages, missed calls, and voicemails, each more desperate than the last. Tiffany alternated between tears and threats. Mrs. Margaret, please, we need to talk. It was all a terrible misunderstanding. 5 minutes later. I am going to talk to a lawyer about elder abuse and family neglect. Brenda was less subtle in her attacks. Selfish old woman, living alone in that huge house while your own family lives cramped in a miserable apartment. You are going to see what happens when you need help and no one is there for you. The girls, probably instructed by their mother and grandmother, sent me messages accusing me of ruining their lives, of taking away the opportunity to have their own rooms, of being a cruel and heartless grandmother. I deleted every message without replying. I didn't owe explanations to any of them. Jason appeared 3 days later, without warning, ringing my new doorbell at 7 in the morning. I saw him through the security camera before opening. He looked terrible, as if he hadn't slept in days, with deep circles under his eyes and wrinkled clothes. I opened the door, but I didn't invite him in immediately. "Are you coming to apologize, or to ask me to reconsider?" He lowered his gaze. "I'm coming to apologize and to tell you something I discovered." I let him in, and we sat in the kitchen, where I made coffee in silence while he gathered the courage to talk. Finally, with his hands trembling around his mug, he told me. "I found documents in the apartment. Tiffany and Brenda had a plan. Mom. A detailed plan." I felt as if the floor moved beneath my feet. "What kind of plan?" Jason took out his phone and showed me photographs he had taken of several documents. There were drafts of power of attorney applications, mental competency evaluation forms I had never signed, but had a forged signature that looked suspiciously like mine, quotes from nursing homes for seniors needing specialized care, and most chilling of all, a draft sales contract for my property with a price that was at least $300,000 below its real market value. "They were going to declare you incompetent," Jason said with a broken voice. "They were going to put you away somewhere, sell your house, keep the money, and make me believe it was all for your own good." The coffee I had just drunk churned in my stomach. It wasn't just an opportunistic invasion. It was a premeditated, calculated plan designed to strip me of everything while painting me as a senile old woman who needed to be protected from herself. "How long have they been planning this?" Jason shook his head. "I don't know for sure, but some of these documents have dates from more than a year ago. Since before we got married. That meant Tiffany had been studying me, evaluating me, planning my dispossession from the moment she met my son. The cooking course, the sweet smiles, the effusive hugs. It had all been calculated theater to gain Jason's trust and access to my life. "Does she know you discovered this?" I asked Jason while observing the photographs on his phone, each image like a stab to my faith in humanity. My son shook his head, running his hands over his face in a gesture of absolute exhaustion. "She doesn't know. I found them when she went out with her mother and the girls. They were hidden in a box at the back of our closet, under some blankets. I took photos of everything and left it exactly as it was. At least he had the intelligence to document the evidence before confronting them." "And what do you plan to do now?" The question came out harder than I intended, but I needed to know if my son was finally going to set boundaries or if he would continue being the perfect puppet of his manipulative wife. Jason stayed silent for almost a full minute, looking at his coffee as if the answers were floating in the dark liquid. "I am going to confront her. I am going to ask her for a divorce, and I am going to make sure they can never hurt you again." I felt a relief so deep I almost got dizzy. My son had finally woken up from the fog of manipulation he had been living in, but I also felt immense sadness for him, because discovering that the person you married is a calculating con artist is a pain no mother wants her son to experience. "You need to do it carefully," I warned him. "You need to protect yourself legally. This woman and her mother are dangerous. Jason, they have zero scruples. Do not underestimate how far they can go." My son nodded, but I could see in his eyes that he still didn't completely understand the depth of the evil he had been living with. I did understand it. I had seen enough in my life to recognize a predator when I had one in front of me. I recommended he talk to Robert, my trusted lawyer, before making any move. Robert was a 60-year-old man, brilliant, meticulous, and with a reputation as a shark in the courtroom. If anyone could help Jason get out of this marriage without losing everything in the process, it was him. Jason accepted, took the phone number I wrote on a napkin, and left my house with a determination in his eyes I hadn't seen in more than a year. What I didn't know, what neither of us knew at that moment, was that Tiffany was much more cunning than we had calculated. That same afternoon, just 3 hours after Jason left my house, my phone exploded with calls. The first was from an unknown number, a social worker from the Department of Elder Affairs. "Mrs. Margaret Mendez? We received a report of concern for your welfare. Your daughter-in-law reported that you are living alone in potentially unsafe conditions, that you have shown signs of cognitive decline, and that you rejected family help aggressively. We need to schedule an evaluation visit to your home." I felt as if icy water had been thrown on me. Tiffany had gotten ahead. She had played the vulnerable grandmother card before Jason could even start the divorce process. I kept calm, something decades working in hostile corporate environments had taught me to perfect. "Of course, miss, I will be delighted to receive your visit. You can come whenever you like, and you will see that I live in perfectly safe conditions, that my mental health is impeccable, and that the only threat to my well-being are the people who tried to invade my property 4 days ago. The police themselves have the report if you want to verify it. There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. Ah, I understand. Well, anyway, we need to do the evaluation. It is protocol when we receive this type of report. Does Thursday at 10 in the morning work for you? I accepted, because refusing would have only made it seem like I had something to hide. But immediately after hanging up, I called Robert. Robert listened to my whole story without interrupting, making notes in that meticulous way he had, occasionally asking specific questions about dates, conversations, witnesses. When I finished, there was a long silence before he spoke. Margaret, this is more serious than I initially thought. What you are describing to me is a very well-orchestrated attempted fraud against an elder. The fact that they forged your signature on legal documents is a serious crime. The attempt to declare you incompetent without legitimate medical evaluation is another violation. And now, making a false report to social services, they are creating an official record that could be used against you if we don't handle it correctly. His tone was grave, professional, but I could detect real concern underneath. What do I need to do? I asked him, feeling anxiety coiling in my stomach like a snake. First, that evaluation on Thursday. I will be there with you. We are going to have all your medical documents prepared, your financial statements showing you manage your accounts perfectly, written testimonies from neighbors about your independence and capacity. We are going to demonstrate that you are completely capable and that this report was made with malice. Second, I am going to file a formal complaint for attempted fraud, forgery of documents, and harassment. And third, we are going to get a restraining order against Tiffany and Brenda. They cannot get near you or your property. It was a solid plan, but I knew Tiffany and Brenda wouldn't give up so easily. Women who plan to steal houses and declare old ladies incompetent aren't the type to accept defeat gracefully. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Robert helped me organize every relevant document. My complete medical history showing perfect cognitive evaluations. My bank statements demonstrating I handled complex transactions without problems. Utility bills paid on time for years. My valid driver's license, tax returns meticulously filed. We also got written statements from Mr. Henderson and 2 other neighbors confirming they saw me every day living my normal life, walking, shopping, gardening, perfectly independent and capable. Even my primary care doctor wrote a detailed letter certifying my excellent physical and mental health for my age. Thursday arrived with an anxiety that had me awake since 4 in the morning. I cleaned my house until it shined, not because it was dirty, but because I needed to do something with the nervous energy consuming me. Robert arrived at 9, an hour before the appointment, reviewing everything with a critical eye. Perfect, he said finally. Any honest evaluator is going to see immediately that this complaint has no foundation. The social worker arrived on time. She was a woman of about 50, with a serious but not hostile expression, clipboard in hand, and a professional attitude I appreciated. She introduced herself as Caroline and explained she would do a tour of the house. She would ask me some questions and evaluate my ability to live independently. What followed was probably the most exhaustive inspection my house had received in its existence. Caroline checked every room, opened the refrigerator to verify I had fresh food, checked the bathrooms to make sure they were clean and functional, verified there were no obvious dangers like loose cables or slippery floors. She asked me questions about my daily routine, my activities, how I handled my finances, if I had friends or regular social contact. I answered every question with calm and detail, showing her my calendars where I noted my appointments, my shopping list for the week, my personal ledgers where I recorded every expense. Robert remained close, without interfering but observing everything, taking his own notes. After almost 2 hours, Caroline sat with me in the living room with an expression that had softened considerably since her arrival. Mrs. Margaret, I am going to be completely honest with you. I came prepared to find a vulnerable person in an at-risk situation. What I found is a perfectly capable, organized, healthy woman completely fit to live independently. Your house is impeccable, your documents are in order, and clearly you manage your life without any problem. I felt the tension I had been holding in my shoulders finally release. In fact, continued Caroline, looking at her notes, it worries me that this report was made with less than honest intentions. You have problems with your daughter-in-law. I told her everything. I didn't spare details. The attempted invasion, the plan to declare me incompetent, the forged documents Jason had discovered. Robert added information about the legal complaint we were preparing. Caroline listened with growing horror, shaking her head. This is elder abuse, Mrs. Margaret, and it is a serious crime. I am going to close this case immediately with a recommendation that there is no foundation for the complaint. But I am also going to add a note in the system alerting about possible malicious use of the protection service with intentions of fraud. If your daughter-in-law tries to make another false report, she will already be flagged in our system. It was a victory, but I knew this was far from over. Caroline was not wrong in her prediction. That same night, just a few hours after she left with her favorable report, Brenda appeared at my door. I saw her through the security cameras, standing in front of my entrance, with arms crossed and an expression of fury that could have melted steel. She rang the doorbell over and over, pressing the button with so much force it looked like she was going to break it. Margaret, open this damn door. I know you're in there. I saw your car in the garage. Her voice was a sharp screech that probably all the neighbors could hear. I didn't open. Instead, I took my phone and recorded everything from the security camera monitor while she continued her tantrum. Manipulative old woman. You put ideas in my son-in-law's head. Now he wants to divorce my daughter. You are going to pay for this. I am going to leave you in the street. The threats continued for almost 20 minutes. Brenda kicked my door, hit the windows, ripped up some of my plants from the front garden, and threw them against the facade. I called the police for the second time in less than a week. While waiting for them to arrive, Brenda began screaming lies so the neighbors would hear them. This woman is sick in the head. She needs help but refuses to receive it. We only want to take care of her, and she treats us like criminals. It was a pathetic, desperate, and absolutely incriminating spectacle. Every word, every violent action was being recorded in high-definition video from 3 different angles. She was, literally, handing me evidence on a silver platter. When the police arrived, Brenda tried to change her attitude instantly. The fake tears reappeared, the broken voice, the trembling hands. But the officers weren't fools. One of them was the same one who had responded to the call during the moving attempt and recognized the address immediately. You again, he said with a tired voice. Didn't we tell you that you couldn't come near this property without the owner's permission? Brenda tried to explain she was worried family, that she only wanted to talk to me about everyone's well-being. I walked out of my house with the phone in my hand, showing the officers the full video of the last 20 minutes. The threats, the vandalism, everything was there in irrefutable evidence. I want to file charges for threats, harassment, and property damage, I said with a firm voice, without a trace of the trembling I felt inside. And I want an immediate restraining order against this woman and her daughter, Tiffany. The younger officer began taking notes, while the older one informed Brenda of her rights. I saw her go pale when she understood that this time she had gone too far, that her outburst of fury had cost her any appearance of being a victim she might have maintained. You can't arrest me. I am a 60-year-old woman. I have granddaughters who depend on me, but her protests served nothing. They handcuffed her right there, in my front yard, while all the neighbors watched from their windows. Mr. Henderson came out to his porch and gave me a thumbs-up gesture of approval. After they took Brenda away, I sat in my living room, shaking from head to toe. The adrenaline that had sustained me during the confrontation finally evaporated, leaving me exhausted and emotionally destroyed. I called Robert and sent him the videos. His response was immediate. This is legal gold, Margaret. With this evidence, the restraining order is guaranteed, and it enormously strengthens our case of harassment and attempted fraud. I should have felt victorious, but I only felt tired of fighting, tired of defending what was mine, tired that my own family had become my worst enemy. Jason called 30 minutes later, his voice loaded with panic. Mom, the police called me. They say they arrested Brenda at your house. What happened?" I told him everything, without softening any details. I heard his agitated breathing on the other end of the line, processing the magnitude of what his wife and mother-in-law had been doing. "I already asked for the divorce formally this morning," he told me finally. "I spoke with Robert 2 days ago, and he helped me prepare everything. Tiffany received the papers 3 hours ago. That's why Brenda must have gone to your house. They are desperate." I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The divorce was necessary, but I knew Tiffany wouldn't accept it peacefully. Women like her never let go of their victims without fighting with every dirty weapon they have available. I wasn't wrong. During the next 10 days, Tiffany unleashed a defamation campaign that would have impressed any psychological warfare specialist. It began with phone calls to all of Jason's acquaintances, crying about how her manipulative mother-in-law had destroyed her marriage, how I had poisoned her son against her, how she had only tried to help me and I had treated her like trash. She called distant cousins I didn't even know existed, Jason's co-workers, even my son's old elementary school teacher she found on social media. Every story was more dramatic than the last, painting me as a cruel villain who hated seeing her son happy. But her mistake was thinking I didn't have my own support network. My lifelong friends, the women I had worked with for decades, the neighbors who truly knew me, everyone closed ranks around me. When Tiffany tried to spread rumors in the neighborhood gardening club about my supposed senility, 3 women who had known me for years confronted her publicly with facts. When she tried to convince the administration of my old job that I had been fired for incompetence, an absurd lie considering I retired with honors. After 40 years, my former boss called personally to verify and then called me to warn me about the lies circulating. The breaking point came when Tiffany, in a move of spectacular desperation, tried to organize a family intervention at my house, without warning me. Of course, she appeared one Sunday morning with a group of people that included a supposed family therapist who turned out to be a friend of Brenda's without any real license, 2 cousins of hers I had never seen in my life, and the girls, Kayla and Madison, who clearly were there against their will. They tried to force entry when I didn't open the door, arguing it was a medical emergency and that I was in danger. I called the police for the 3rd time, and this time the officers who arrived were visibly frustrated with the whole situation. "Ma'am," the officer told Tiffany with exhausted patience, "there is a temporary restraining order against you and your mother pending judicial approval. Even though it isn't officially approved yet, continuing to harass this lady is only going to guarantee the judge approves it permanently. I suggest you leave right now and stop making this harder for yourself." Tiffany tried her tears routine again, but this time no one bought the act. Even the fake therapist seemed uncomfortable, probably realizing he had been dragged into a legal situation that could cost him trouble. The group finally dispersed, but not without Tiffany shouting one last threat at me. "This doesn't end here, Margaret. You'll see." But it did end there. Or at least it began to end. Robert worked with relentless efficiency during the next 2 weeks. He presented all the collected evidence. The videos of Brenda vandalizing my property, the audio recordings of the telephone threats, the forged documents Jason had photographed, the social worker's report confirming the complaint was false, neighbors' testimonies, everything. The judge who reviewed the case didn't take 5 minutes to approve permanent 3-year restraining orders against Tiffany and Brenda. They could not come within 200 yards of my house, my person, or any place I frequented regularly. Violating the order would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Jason's divorce process advanced parallel to all this. Tiffany tried to fight for a ridiculous division of assets, claiming she had a right to half of everything my son possessed, despite having been married less than a year. Robert, who was also representing Jason in the divorce, destroyed her in every hearing. He presented evidence of the premeditated fraud plan, the lies about my mental health, the attempted invasion of property. The judge was not kind. Not only did he deny any claim of Tiffany's on Jason's assets, but he publicly admonished her in court for her fraudulent behavior and warned her she was 1 step away from facing criminal charges. 6 months after that 68th birthday that almost destroyed my life, the closure I needed finally arrived. Jason's divorce was finalized on a cold February morning. I went to the final hearing, not because I needed to be there legally, but because I wanted to see with my own eyes the moment my son freed himself from the claws of that woman. Tiffany arrived in a dramatic black dress, makeup intentionally smudged to look like the desolate victim, accompanied by a cheap lawyer who clearly knew he had a losing case. When the judge declared the marriage officially dissolved, I saw something break in Tiffany's facade. The victim mask fell for a second, replaced by an expression of pure hatred directed toward me. But she didn't scare me anymore. She no longer had any power over my family. What came next was almost poetic in its justice. It turns out Brenda had spent all her savings, and Tiffany's, on lawyers trying to fight legal battles they couldn't win. The apartment where the three lived, plus the girls, was a rental that depended on Tiffany's income working as a receptionist at a spa, a job she lost when the constant absences for court hearings became unsustainable. Without Jason's salary, they had planned to control. Without my house, they had planned to steal. Without the resources they had calculated having, they found themselves exactly in the position they had tried to put me in. Vulnerable, in debt, and without options. Mr. Henderson, my faithful neighbor, kept me informed through his neighborhood gossip network about what was happening with them. Apparently, Brenda and Tiffany had to move to an even smaller apartment, barely 2 bedrooms, in a rundown building in a less safe part of the city. The girls, Kayla and Madison, who initially had been on their mother and grandmother's side, began to question the official story when the truth started to leak out. A classmate of Kayla's, whose mother was a friend of one of my friends, told her the real version of events, how they had tried to steal an old lady's house, how they had lied and manipulated, how everything had been a calculated plan from the beginning. The girls were ashamed, deeply. One afternoon, almost 8 months after the initial incident, Kayla appeared alone at my door. I saw her through the cameras, standing nervously, without her mother, without her grandmother. I considered not opening, but something in her body language, the way she looked at the ground, made me reconsider. I opened the door with the security chain on, maintaining physical and emotional distance. Mrs. Margaret. Her voice was small, nothing like the arrogant girl who had helped carry boxes during the invasion attempt. "Can I talk to you? Just 5 minutes. My mom and grandmother don't know I'm here." I let her in, but I stayed alert, my phone in my pocket with the speed dial to the police ready just in case. We sat in the living room, with a table between us. Kayla didn't look up for almost a full minute, twisting her hands in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was loaded with genuine shame. "I came to apologize. Me, us. Madison and I didn't know. Well, we knew something wasn't right, but Mom and Grandma told us you were sick, that your mind wasn't working well, that we were going to take care of you. They made us believe we were heroines, saving an old lady who couldn't fend for herself. But it was a lie. It was all a lie." The tears rolling down her cheeks seemed real, not her mother's calculated theater. "Why are you coming to tell me this now?" I asked her, without softening my tone. I needed to know if this was genuine or just another manipulation, perhaps sent by Tiffany to soften me up. Kayla took out her phone and showed me text conversations between her mother, and her grandmother. Messages where Brenda instructed her exactly what to say if anyone asked about me, how to present the story so they looked like the victims. Messages where Tiffany celebrated almost managing to take over the house. Messages where they discussed how much money they would get when they finally got rid of the old woman. Reading those words, seeing my existence reduced to a monetary obstacle they needed to eliminate, turned my stomach. "My sister and I want to leave," continued Kayla, putting her phone away. "We want to live with our dad. He was never the monster Mom told us he was. We have been talking to him in secret these last few months, and he told us his version of everything. We realize now that Mom and Grandma used us, turned us into part of their horrible plans, and we don't want to be like that. We don't want to be like them." I believed her. Not because I was naive, but because there was an authenticity in her pain that cannot be easily faked. 16 years is old enough to understand she has been manipulated, but young enough for it to hurt deeply. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her everything was forgiven, but I accepted her apology with a nod. "I hope you and your sister can escape the toxicity of your mother and grandmother," I told her honestly. "But understand that I cannot have any kind of relationship with you girls. You were part of something that almost destroyed me. Maybe with time, maybe years, that can change. But not now." Kayla nodded, drying her tears with the back of her hand. I understand. I just wanted you to know we are sorry, and that we admire how you fought for yours. You taught us that women don't have to be victims. She left shortly after, and I sat in my living room processing the conversation for hours. Jason and I began slowly to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy or fast. The betrayal I felt when he allowed his wife to almost strip me of everything was a deep wound that didn't heal with simple apologies. But my son was genuinely remorseful, and more importantly, he was doing the real work of understanding how he had been manipulated, how his own insecurities and desire for family had blinded him to the obvious red flags. He started therapy, something I had suggested multiple times, and he finally accepted. Our conversations went from being tense and full of awkward silences to genuinely reconnected. 1 year after the disastrous birthday, Jason organized a small dinner at my house, just the two of us, to celebrate my 69th. He cooked himself, following recipes his father used to make, filling my kitchen with aromas I hadn't smelled in years. As we ate on my deck with the ocean view, under the stars, he looked at me with wet eyes and said, "Mom, I almost lost you because I was a blind idiot. I almost let those women steal everything from you. I don't know if I'm ever going to forgive myself for that." I took his hand across the table, that hand I had held his whole life, and told him, "I already forgave you, son. Now it's your turn to forgive yourself." Meanwhile, Tiffany and Brenda didn't have as much luck rebuilding anything. The rumors Mr. Henderson shared with me, which I listened to with a mix of satisfaction and pity, painted a picture of complete unraveling. Brenda had developed health problems from the stress, mainly high blood pressure requiring expensive medication they could barely afford. Tiffany was now working 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night after working at a clothing store during the day, barely earning enough to maintain the tiny apartment where they lived. The girls had finally moved in with their father, leaving Tiffany and Brenda alone in that space that probably felt even smaller without them. The most ironic thing of all was when Mr. Henderson told me he had seen Brenda complaining to other neighbors at the grocery store about how unfair life was, about how some people have everything and appreciate nothing, about how she and her daughter had been treated cruelly by a rich and selfish family. Even after everything, after losing everything due to their own greed and manipulation, they still saw themselves as the victims of the story. They hadn't learned anything, hadn't gained any wisdom from their fall, just bitterness and resentment that would probably consume them for the rest of their lives. I, on the other hand, flourished. Without the constant weight of anxiety, without always looking over my shoulder expecting the next attack, I rediscovered the joy of living in my beautiful house by the sea. I resumed my morning walk routine with renewed pleasure, feeling the sand under my feet and the sun on my face like blessings I would never take for granted again. My jasmine plants grew more lush than ever, as if celebrating along with me the victory over those who tried to uproot us from our home. But the true transformation came when I decided to turn my experience into something meaningful, something that could help other people in similar situations. I contacted a senior community center in the city and offered to give talks on protection against elder fraud, on how to recognize signs of family manipulation, on the importance of maintaining healthy boundaries even with people who claim to love you. My first talk had an attendance of 15 people. The second had 40. By the 5th talk, they had to move me to a larger auditorium because more than 100 people wanted to hear my story and learn from it. I met dozens of women and men who had gone through similar or worse situations. A 72-year-old lady whose son had stripped her of her life savings. An 80-year-old man whose daughter-in-law had convinced him to sign documents transferring his house to her name. A 65-year-old woman whose own children had falsely declared her incompetent and had her practically a prisoner in her own home. Every story broke my heart, but also strengthened me in my conviction that sharing my experience was important, necessary, vital. Robert became more than my lawyer. He became a true friend and ally in this new mission. Together we created a small nonprofit organization dedicated to helping seniors protect themselves legally against family exploitation. We offered free legal consultations, workshops on safe estate planning, and resources to identify and escape abuse situations. It wasn't anything big or glamorous, but it was making a real difference in real lives, and that filled me with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. 18 months after that catastrophic birthday, While walking through the farmer's market near my house, I bumped face to face with Tiffany. It was completely accidental. Neither of us expected it. She was pushing a shopping cart full of cheap vegetables and generic products, dressed in worn-out clothes that had seen better days, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail without the elaborate style she used to wear. She saw me and froze. Her eyes widened with a mix of shock, shame, and that residual hatred that probably would never completely disappear. For a moment I thought she was going to say something, that she was going to launch some final diatribe or accusation. But she didn't. She simply lowered her gaze and hurried past me, as if being near me burned her. I didn't feel triumph in that encounter, nor did I feel pity. Exactly. What I felt was a kind of definitive peace, a final closure. That woman who had tried to destroy my life was now just a stranger in a market, someone whose power over me existed solely in my memory. She wasn't a threat anymore. She wasn't relevant anymore. She was simply a woman who had bet everything on an evil plan and had lost spectacularly. Life had returned to her exactly what she had tried to do to me. Loss, humiliation, constant struggle. And although I didn't rejoice in her suffering, neither did I feel guilt for having defended what was mine. My 3-story beach house, that dream they almost snatched from me, became something more than simply my home. It became my symbol of resistance, my monument to the idea that older women are not easy victims, that we have a voice, rights, and the capacity to fight fiercely for what belongs to us. I organized monthly meetings of my support group on my deck, where women who had suffered attempted exploitation could share their stories, mourn their losses, celebrate their victories. My living room filled with laughter and tears, with collective strength and female solidarity that crossed generations. Jason met someone new almost 2 years after his divorce. A woman named Linda, coincidentally with the same name as my cousin, who was a high school teacher, divorced with no kids, with a genuine smile, and without any interest in my properties or finances. The first time I brought her to dinner at my house, I observed every gesture, every word, every interaction with my son, looking for red flags. But there weren't any. There was only a normal woman, with her own resources, her own stable life, who seemed to genuinely enjoy my son's company for who he was, not for what he could give her. I gave them my blessing, cautious but hopeful. Mr. Henderson, my faithful neighbor, became one of my best friends. We went on morning walks together now, comparing notes on neighborhood gossip, laughing about the little foolishness of daily life. He told me that Brenda and Tiffany had finally moved from the small apartment to something even cheaper in another part of the city, probably unable to stand living so close to the neighborhood where everyone knew their shame. I heard that Brenda tells anyone who listens that you treated them unfairly, he told me one morning while we watched the sunrise over the ocean. Let them, I replied with genuine tranquility. Some people are never going to accept responsibility for their own actions. That is their burden to carry, not mine. I celebrated my 70th birthday with a huge party at my house. I invited everyone, Jason and Linda, Robert and his wife, my friends from the gardening club, the members of my support group, neighbors, acquaintances from the community center, even the social worker Caroline who had verified my competence 2.5 years ago. My house filled with people who genuinely appreciated me, who celebrated not only my birthday, but my survival, my victory, my refusal to be turned into a victim. There was no drama, no unpleasant surprises, no manipulators lurking in the shadows planning my dispossession. There was only love, laughter, good food, and the deep satisfaction of being surrounded by people who valued me for who I really was. During the toast, Jason stood up with his glass in hand and spoke with an emotional voice. I want to say something about my mother. 2.5 years ago, I almost lost her because I was stupid enough to let evil people manipulate me against her. They tried to steal everything from her, her house, her dignity, her autonomy, her peace of mind. But they underestimated Margaret Mendez. They underestimated the strength of a woman who built everything she has with her own work, intelligence, and determination. My mother not only defended herself, but turned her experience into a way to help hundreds of other people. She is the strongest woman I know, and I am honored to be her son, even though I almost didn't deserve to be. Tears ran down my face while everyone applauded, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that all the pain, all the struggle, all the battle had been worth it. That night, after the last guest left, and I was alone on my deck watching the black waves under the full moon, I reflected on the whole journey I had traveled. From that lonely 66-year-old widow who just wanted to enjoy her retirement in peace, to the 70-year-old woman who had become an advocate for seniors' rights. From almost losing everything, to gaining something much more valuable than material possessions. My voice, my power, my unshakable certainty that I deserved respect and protection. The waves broke against the shore in their eternal rhythm, indifferent to human dramas, reminding me that life continues beyond our little tragedies and triumphs. I thought about Tiffany and Brenda occasionally. I wondered if ever in some dark moment of the night they looked in the mirror and admitted the truth about what they had tried to do. Probably not. People like them rarely reach that level of self-awareness. They would probably continue blaming the world, me, the injustice of life for their situation, without ever recognizing that they themselves had dug their own hole. And that was fine. I didn't need their regret or recognition. They no longer occupied space in my heart or my mind, except as closed chapters in the story of my life. My 3-story house was still mine. My deeds were secure in a safe that only I could open. My finances were protected with security measures Robert had helped me establish. My will was clearly drafted, without ambiguities, without room for manipulation. And most importantly, my mind was clear, my spirit was strong, and my life was full of purpose and meaning. I had survived a calculated attempt to strip me of everything, and not only had I survived, I had thrived in ways I would never have imagined possible before it all started. As I prepared to enter the house and go to bed that night of my 70th birthday, I took a last moment to touch the railing of my deck, to feel the solidity of my home under my hands. This house, this piece of paradise I almost lost, now represented much more than bricks and cement. It represented the victory of a woman who refused to be silenced, intimidated, or stripped. It represented the importance of trusting your intuition, of defending your boundaries, of fighting for what is yours, even when the fight seems impossible. And it represented the fundamental truth that never, never are you too old to be strong, to be brave, to be unstoppable. I smiled toward the dark ocean and whispered to the night. They tried to destroy me, but the only thing they achieved was showing me exactly how powerful I really am. And with that truth settled deeply in my heart, I entered my house, locked the door, and slept the most peaceful night I had had in years.